Guys, welcome back. Today we're talking about the Road Revolution and the shot heard around the world. So our objective for today, we're going to describe the origins of the Revolutionary War, explain the events that took place leading to America's independence, and evaluate the impact of the war on America, Britain, and the world. So our essential questions today: what were the events of the American Revolution, and how did the Revolutionary War impact the world? And our standards for today are 8.4.12d. So, we know that the colonies were uniting to aid the people of Massachusetts, who began arming themselves against the British soldiers that were present there. And we know, because of the last time we talked together, that the First Continental Congress, which was the colonists coming together and forming their first own government, it was the first time that they were all meeting and discussing what to do to fight against the British, or to get back at them for all of these taxes and laws that they're now imposing. So the First Continental Congress met in 1774, and there were 55 delegates from 12 colonies. And the major agenda they had was they wanted to list all of the problems that they had with the then king, King George III. And the nice thing here is they had actually one vote per colony represented, so we're already starting to see some of the beginnings of a type of representative government. So, in early 1775, General Thomas Gage is going to send in British troops from Boston to Lexington and Concord to try to destroy the colonial militias as well as their military supplies. Now, when this happens, we're going to see the run of Paul Revere and William Dawes when they make their horse ride throughout the countryside and throughout town, declaring that the British are coming. They're warning the Minutemen of the approaching British soldiers, telling them to get ready. So then what we're going to see on April 18th of 1775, we're going to hear the shot that was heard around the world. That's what they call it. They're not sure to this date which side shot first, but whoever it was, it ended up changing the fate of the Americas forever. So, the first major battle we're going to see is by the Green Mountain Boys. This was led by Ethan Allen, and they led an attack on Fort Ticonderoga in in Vermont, to try to steal cannons from the British. Now, the two opposing sides, we had the Patriots against the British. They had some advantages and disadvantages. Patriots were really good with firearms, and many actually had their own weapons. They had really strong leadership under George Washington. They chose him as he had many victories in the French and Indian War, and they thought that he would be a great one to lead the Patriots. They also had the will to defend their homes and their property. They were on the defense, and they knew the land very well because they had lived there. Now, some of the disadvantages for the Patriots: they really lacked experience, and they really lacked supplies. They didn't have as much as they needed, and they were not as organized as the British. The British, on the other hand, will have a few advantages. For example, they're very well trained and they're very well experienced. They had an excellent navy, which will prove a point because they will actually form a blockade and kind of cut off some of our supplies during the war. And remember, this is the best navy in the world at this point, so they really know what they're doing. And even though it's not talked about a lot, the British actually did have a lot of support from the colonists. We call these type of colonists loyalists. They are loyal to the crown. So they were able to get supplies, housing, information, whatever they needed to fight the Patriots. So some of the disadvantages: they were far from home, they wouldn't hear news, they wouldn't get orders very quickly, it was also difficult to get supplies, and they really didn't know the land as well as the opposition because they had not been there as long. So fighting in the north took place by October 1776. The British had actually captured New York and drove the Continental Army, which was that led by George Washington, into Pennsylvania. And this is when many troops start deserting George Washington and kind of doing their own thing, or just going home. And by the winter of 1776, the Patriots were on the verge of collapse, and the Continental Congress had actually fled to Philadelphia. Now, the Continental Army at this time was lacking financial support. They didn't have troops, they didn't have supplies, and so Washington had to be innovative. And he actually decided, you know what? Normally we wouldn't fight during the winter, but we're going to have to. We're going to have to use the winter to our advantage. So, Washington and 2,400 troops left Pennsylvania on Christmas night of 1776, where they crossed the ice-choked Delaware River, surprising 1,400 Hessians, which were German troops for hire, in Trenton, New Jersey. And during that time, the Second Continental Congress is actually meeting all while this is going on. And the main goal of the Second Continental Congress is that the Declaration of Independence was being written. And the main reason for that, they were trying to explain why they wanted to break away from England. So Congress declared independence in July of 1776, and it really was a hard decision for them to make, because if it didn't go well, if they didn't win the war, they would be considered traitors to England and could be executed. So they decided to have their friend Thomas Jefferson draft a document that would declare that the colonies were free and independent states, that they were no longer under the rule of the oppressive king. And all of the members of the Continental Congress signed this document on July 4th, 1776, thus putting it into action. So one turning point of the Revolutionary War will come in October of 1777 in Saratoga, New York, where even though the British will try to recapture Fort Ticonderoga, there will be a lot of British losses, and they will end up being surrounded at Saratoga. And the British will actually end up surrendering there. And like we said, this was considered a turning point in the Revolution. It's a major victory. It's going to be plastered all over newspapers and will really be a boost in morale for the Patriots. And another major impact of the Battle of Saratoga, probably the most important impact, is that France is now going to be convinced to become America's ally. And this is going to mean more money, more troops, and more supplies, as well as a navy for the Patriots fighting the British. And 1 year later, Spain is also going to join the war, and France is ally, meaning even more supplies. So it's looking really good for the Patriots by 1777. So when it comes to fighting for liberty, African Americans and women also were able to fight for liberty in their own way. African Americans actually would be allowed to fight eventually in the Continental Army, and the American Navy actually allowed African Americans to join from the start of the war. Many of these African Americans had jobs including spies, drummers, guides, and a lot of the physical work as well, the physical labor, moving cannons and things like that. And surprisingly, many runaway slaves had actually joined the British because they were so against slavery. They knew that many of the colonists still were for slavery, and most people had slaves at this time. So they're going to actually fight for the British, hoping to be freed if the British won. Women, on the other hand, are going to do some things at home. For example, Betsy Ross is going to be the first one to sew the American flag. She comes up with the idea of the red for the blood, the white for independence, so on and so forth, the stars to kind of show the unity of all the colonies together. And we're also going to see some other ladies help actually on the battlefield. For example, Mary Ludwig Hayes would earn the nickname Molly Pitcher for carrying water to soldiers in battle. So there were some more risky ladies at that time who were willing to go out into the fields and help throughout the battle itself. So, problems with the war. Well, Congress at the time had little real power, so it could really ask each state or each colony to provide troops, money, and supplies, but we didn't have the power to tax the states to support financing this war. So it was really lucky for us that the French and the Spanish came to our aid. Otherwise, we probably would have been without a good amount of supplies during this war. Now, we still will have a good amount of debt once the war is over, but we'll find other ways to deal with that. So victory at Yorktown will come. That's Yorktown, Virginia. The British will surrender here and then begin recognizing the United States as an independent country. So it will be on October 19th, 1781, that the British surrender and the American Revolution is over this war for independence. So what is the impact of this revolution? Well, we know that in 1783, Great Britain started accepting America's independence because of the Treaty of Paris of 1783. And the revolution is really going to help inspire patriotism or love of their country for most colonists. Now, for African Americans, the results were a little bit mixed because in the North, the war will actually promote anti-slavery. They will see that African Americans stepped up and were their counterparts during this war and helped. But in the South, it's actually going to make slavery more restrictive, meaning it's kind of going to make it worse. And for many African Americans, the revolution made them more conscious, or actually made them start realizing that there was this thing called freedom and that it was a real possibility for them if they just worked hard enough. So for Native Americans, the war's outcome was a bit of a disaster because for many of them, they were forced to move further west, and the now Americans actually ended up taking more of their land. But perhaps the greatest effect was to spread the idea of liberty both here and abroad, at least for some. So it's really this pushing of the ideas of liberty. So you might be asking yourself at this time, well, if it was all about freedom and if it was all about liberty, did Jefferson think about non-white populations like Native Americans or African Americans when he was writing the Declaration of Independence, declaring our freedom? Well, surprisingly, Jefferson actually did first include African Americans in the first drafts of the Declaration of Independence. But the southern states would not accept this Declaration of Independence and would not sign it unless they removed those conditions so that they could allow for slavery. So sometimes during war, we have to befriend our enemies, which in this case for many Northerners was slavery. We had to, uphold the idea of slavery in order to get the Southerners to support this idea of independence from the British. But there would be another war fought later on in the 1800s for slavery itself, or over slavery itself. And that's pretty much our lecture for today. So you can go ahead, answer the questions that are below, and then go ahead and do our activity and move on to the next topic.